You may be seated. As I mentioned at the welcome, we have a very special thing happening this morning. 2 weeks ago, Marcia Melton gave her testimony, and it was powerful because it spoke of great loss and of God's faithfulness. Every person's testimony is different. You have a testimony. And one of the greatest, most wonderful truths that we have is that when we speak to someone who doesn't know God about what God has done in our life personally, that resonates with people. It helps people understand, I'm not too far gone. I'm not unlovable. I'm not unwanted. Because a testimony reveals our flaws, our hurts, our losses, our lacking, and how God, as the song said, takes all our pieces and puts them back together and makes us whole. That's what a testimony does. And so I want to invite Sloane to come up. She's going to share her testimony. She had a passion and a heart to do this after the Emmaus walk. That's one of the wonderful things about an Emmaus walk is it opens your eyes to see the faithfulness of God. So Sloane, take a deep breath.
Okay, so I just want to say before I start that this must be a pretty strong testimony because Satan did everything he could to keep us from getting here today. Seriously, everything he could throw our way, he threw. But because of God, we're here. So, this is the story of how God worked in me to save my life. I was a typical rebellious teenager, always lying, being disrespectful, and doing things I knew I shouldn't be doing. This behavior included dating a 21-year-old at the age of 17. Now, this relationship was approved by both sets of parents, and so mine decided they didn't like him anymore, and for good reason. So of course I ended things, at least until I turned 18. Getting back together with him was more to spite my mother than it was because I actually wanted to be with him. Doing this led to, only a month later, him drugging my drink and sexually assaulting me the night after a concert. I didn't think anything of it until it was brought to my attention by a friend of mine what had truly happened. I didn't tell anyone for months, and when I did, I just let it roll off my shoulders. You'd think I did, but really it was the beginning of a more self-destructive behavior that would soon result in giving up my relationship with God. A few years pass after this incident. I'm 20 years old, and I'm heavily drinking almost every night to cope with all the pain I've never wanted to talk about. I was working as a server, and every single night we went to the bar. I don't know how, but I was never I was asked for my ID. While I was in this vicious cycle, I met a man I truly thought was the one. He treated me exactly how I had always wanted a man to treat me. He gave me as much attention as I ever wanted. He showered me in gifts, told me he loved me, and made me feel important. So with all of that, I thought it would be great to move away with him. I'm sure you can guess how that ended. Fast forward 9 months, I was no longer being showered with gifts and I love yous. He barely gave me any attention, and all he did was belittle me and treat me like trash. The night he broke up with me, he told me, and I quote, "You're worthless. You will never be loved by anyone, Sloane. No one will ever want to be with such a sorry piece of like you." And I believed every word he said from the night on. That night I cursed at God. I turned from him completely. I no longer believed in him, because why would I believe in someone who let me go through all the things that I had? This was the beginning of an even worse downward spiral. I moved back to Odessa and barely spoke to my family. I started doing drugs and drinking more heavily than I ever had. One night I even did 8 lines of cocaine. To be honest, I should have died that night, and looking back, I truly believe it was by God's grace that I didn't. The drinking was occurring every single night, every single night and day. I honestly barely slept. I don't even remember much of those months because I was never sober. My last straw with life finally came the night I went out drinking with some friends and trusted a friend of 8 years to take me home. I do remember telling him, "Just drop me off at the door, I can make it inside." He didn't just drop me off at the door. At one point between getting in his truck and heading home, I had blacked out, and the next thing I know, it happened to me again. I was raped for a second time with no recollection. A few nights later, I decided that was it. I was done. I left the house of a friend I was staying with and didn't say a word. I was heading to finally end this never-ending painful life of mine. I no longer had a reason I wanted to live. It was close to midnight, and during my drive, I suppose you could say I had a tiny bit of faith left in me that God was real. Because as I was driving, I was crying and screaming at God. I screamed at him, "Show me you're real. Prove to me you exist, and I have a reason to live because I'm about to end it all." Not even a minute later, I get a call from my little sister, which was odd because we hadn't talked in a very long time, and she never calls me this late. Nevertheless, I wipe my tears and answer as if nothing's wrong, and what she wanted to say to me is the reason I'm here today. She said, "Hey, Sloane, I just wanted to tell you I love you, and I miss you, and I don't know what I'd do without you." I told her I loved her too, and asked if I could call her back. And after we hung up, I pulled over and bawled my eyes out like never before, begging God to forgive me. I truly believe not only was my sister telling me those things, but it was God telling me he loved me and missed me. I swear I felt him hug me, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace, true peace. From that night on, I was a different person, and he worked in me every day since. See, I thought I was too far from God to ever come back. I never thought he'd want me again. But he'd never left my side or gave up on me, even when I gave up on him. He chased after me through my darkest times and showed me he loved me when I called upon him when I needed him. God had faith in me when I didn't have any in myself or him. So if you think you've messed up too much for God to forgive you, think again, because I'm here today to tell you my story because he forgave me. He will fight for us because he loves us. God's faithfulness and grace saved my life. 2 Timothy 2:13, "If we are faithless, he remains faithful, for he cannot disown himself." 1 Corinthians 13:7, "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things." Psalm 86:5, "You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you." He loves you, and he will never give up on you no matter how far you run. Thank you.